In recent times, Elon Musk has reignited a debate that has been simmering for quite a while now. He made a rather blunt prediction that stirred the pot. We might be heading towards a future where money, as we know it, could become obsolete because artificial intelligence and robots might drive the cost of goods and services down to almost nothing. Musk wasn't merely talking about making production more efficient or just cheaper consumer products. His vision pointed towards a more profound structural shift. Imagine a world where human labor is no longer a critical factor in production, where energy, logistics, and manufacturing, even large segments of services, are managed by intelligent, automated systems at scale. If this becomes reality, the very foundation of our economic system, wages, purchasing power, and pricing could begin to crumble. These remarks have drawn significant attention, not solely because Musk is a well-known figure, but because he is part of a group of influential actors who are constructing the very infrastructure that could make parts of this vision plausible. Automation, robotics, large-scale computing, and energy systems. This debate, therefore, extends beyond the technical realm. It becomes deeply political and moral. Such a future beckons us to question whether it represents a liberation from economic anxiety and mandatory work, or whether it ushers in a new kind of dependency. In this envisioned future, access to life's essentials might be dictated by systems that ordinary people neither own, nor can audit, nor challenge in any meaningful way. Once framed in this manner, the idea of a world without money transcends its origins as a niche thought experiment. It becomes a pressing inquiry into what work signifies, what the role of the state should be, whether nations continue to be coherent units of governance, and why science fiction frequently imagines corporate sovereignty taking over from public authority. This discussion aims to dissect the internal logic of the post-scarcity argument, explore the likely dynamics during the transition, and identify the potential failure modes that could transform a utopian promise into a subtle form of domination. Let us delve into the post-scarcity logic, how money might lose its purpose. Money at its core is not some arcane magic. It is a social technology designed to manage scarcity. When resources are limited, societies must devise mechanisms to determine who gets what, when, and at what cost. Throughout history, the instruments we have used have evolved, from barter systems to coins, from paper to modern financial systems. Yet the underlying function has remained constant, allocating scarce goods and coordinating complex exchanges without causing constant conflict. The post-scarcity argument posits that advanced AI and robotics could strike at scarcity at the core of production. Consider a world where farming is largely automated, where factories are operated by intelligent machines, where supply chains are orchestrated by predictive systems, and where maintenance and operations are increasingly autonomous. In such a scenario, the cost of essentials begins to plummet. When the marginal cost of producing one more unit of many basic necessities approaches zero, money loses its primary role as an allocator, at least for those categories. This does not mean that the laws of physics cease to apply. Land remains finite, certain minerals continue to be constrained, and space and time remain limited. However, it does imply that the essentials of life could become so abundant in many regions that pricing shifts from being about scarcity to being about governance. The central question then changes from who has money to who owns and controls the systems that produce and distribute what people need. But why can't this transformation happen overnight? While AI advances feel explosive due to the rapid scalability of software, the material economy does not follow the same swift pace. Real abundance depends on physical entities like factories, warehouses, ports, power grids, transport networks, and a vast ecosystem of tangible components. Even if AI can design and optimize these systems, constructing them at scale is a slow, capital-intensive, and politically intricate process. There's also a cultural lag to consider. Societies do not update as seamlessly as software applications. Work is not merely an economic arrangement. It is a source of identity, social structure, and personal meaning. Removing labor from the center of life alters more than just income. It disrupts status hierarchies, moral narratives about who is deserving, and the everyday routines that bind communities together. Thus, the most precarious phase is not the end state of abundance. It is the transitional period, where labor displacement occurs before the establishment of broad provisioning systems and new social norms. The most volatile stage involves disruption without abundance. The most realistic near-term trajectory is not that everything suddenly becomes free. Instead, AI might render large categories of work economically unnecessary before societies have constructed credible replacement structures. This scenario creates a period of shock. Shrinking job markets, rapidly obsolete skills, and large populations experiencing displacement without a stable new social contract. In that environment, conflict is not solely about material deprivation. It also revolves around dignity and agency. When people are conditioned to associate adulthood and self-worth with productive employment, job loss becomes as much a cultural and psychological crisis as it is an economic one. Even if future abundance is achievable, the immediate pain is already present, and political systems rarely wait for long-term payoffs. Now, one might ask, is this just communism with better technology? On the surface, a world with guaranteed essentials might resemble a familiar ideological project: reduced markets, shared provisioning, and less reliance on wages. This resemblance invites the label communism. However, the foundations are fundamentally different. Traditional communism sought to politically impose equality and distribution within an economy still governed by scarcity, often resulting in bureaucratic coercion and persistent shortages. The post-scarcity argument flips this order. Technology first reduces scarcity, and then society reorganizes around the new production reality. This distinction matters, but it does not automatically lead to freedom. A technologically abundant system can still be politically oppressive if control is centralized and access is conditional. Abundance does not equate to autonomy. The real risk lies in a soft dependence that feels like freedom until it no longer does. If most necessities are provided through automated infrastructure, the key power is not the ability to print money. Instead, it's the ability to grant or revoke access. A system can be materially generous while still being politically dominating, simply by making participation mandatory and exit impossible. In such a model, people do not suffer from classic forms of coercion, but they can still find themselves trapped. If housing, energy, mobility, communication, and healthcare are delivered through platforms with rules that are opaque, unchallengeable, or privately enforced, citizens effectively become users, and rights gradually morph into terms of service. This is why the most profound question is not whether AI can make things cheap. It is whether access to essentials is treated as a non-revocable right or as a privilege managed by those who control the infrastructure. Purpose, status, and the human need for meaning often enter these debates with the assumption that if basic needs are met, people will naturally accept the system that provides them. This assumption misunderstands human motivation. People do not survive on calories alone. They thrive on recognition, contribution, identity, and belonging. Work functions as an organizing principle for daily life and as a signal of value within a community. If a society removes work without creating credible alternatives for meaning and status, it risks widespread alienation. Some individuals might flourish in creative, social, or scientific pursuits, while others may feel displaced and without purpose. This psychological reality becomes a political force, fueling backlash even in a world that is materially comfortable. Why does science fiction consistently predict corporate rule? Dystopian science fiction is not primarily about predicting futuristic gadgets. It is about forecasting governance failures. Corporate sovereignty appears in these stories because corporations are structurally suited to a world where territory is less important than infrastructure. They are transnational, quick-moving, and optimized for scale. They can deploy technology immediately and influence behavior through products and platforms without requiring democratic consent. As AI becomes a primary engine of power, those who control compute, data pipelines, robotic supply chains, energy access, and distribution networks hold the advantage. If these layers remain predominantly private, the state's role can degrade from that of sovereign authority to a reactive regulator, always one step behind the system's owners. In this context, science fiction's megacorp world is not a mere fantasy. It is a coherent extrapolation. When public institutions fail to govern infrastructure, infrastructure begins to govern society. Do nations still make sense when money and labor weaken? The modern nation-state is built on a few fundamental pillars: territorial borders, administrative control over populations, the monopoly on legitimate force, and fiscal capacity through taxation and currency. If labor becomes less central and money becomes less decisive for daily life, the state loses some of its economic levers. This does not mean states will vanish, but it does mean their function will change. States may remain crucial for security, conflict management, and legal legitimacy. However, economic power could drift towards entities that control production and access rather than territory. This creates a world where borders still exist, but sovereignty becomes porous, contested by transnational infrastructure owners and the protocols governing digital and robotic systems. Why would billionaires advocate for a future where money doesn't matter? The common assumption is that the wealthy would oppose a world where money loses its meaning. However, extreme wealth already behaves differently from ordinary money. At the top echelons, what matters is not cash for consumption, but control over systems, leverage over institutions, and the ability to shape the future. Money is a tool for acquiring influence and building infrastructure. If money fades as a coordinating mechanism, the center of gravity shifts towards ownership of the productive machine itself: energy, compute, robotics, and networks. There's also an argument for stability. If AI eliminates jobs without a provisioning framework, societies could become politically explosive. Unmanaged disruption could trigger radicalism, violence, or aggressive redistribution. From an elite perspective, managed abundance can appear as a form of risk management, a method to prevent the transition from spiraling into systemic collapse. This motivation is not necessarily benevolent, but it is rational. When could any of this realistically come to pass? There is no definitive date when money will cease to exist. This is a gradient, not a switch. The near term is likely to feature rapid labor disruption and concentrated gains from AI, while robotics and physical automation scale more slowly. Over time, certain essentials may become significantly cheaper and more reliably provided, particularly in high-capacity regions with strong energy infrastructure. Partial post-scarcity could emerge unevenly. Some countries or blocs may provide low-cost basics to most citizens earlier than others, while other regions remain trapped in scarcity, conflict, or dependency. A genuinely global condition, in which money becomes marginal for most daily life, would require not only advanced technology, but also stable governance, resilient infrastructure, and institutional mechanisms that prevent monopolistic control. That's why claims that this transformation will happen soon should be interpreted as decades, not mere years. In conclusion, AI does not decide the future. Governance does. AI and robotics may indeed push parts of human life towards unprecedented abundance, making the essentials of survival cheaper and easier than any previous era could imagine. But technology alone does not determine whether that abundance translates into freedom. The deciding factor is who owns the infrastructure, how allocation rules are set, whether decisions are transparent and contestable, and whether access to necessities is protected as a right rather than granted as a privilege. The central question, therefore, is not whether money disappears. It is whether power becomes more accountable or more concentrated. In an algorithmic civilization, the ultimate struggle is not over coins and banknotes, but over the rules that govern access, participation, and human dignity. Whoever writes those rules will shape the world that comes next.